Jacob adjusted the scope on his blaster rifle, the dry winds of Kalanor whipping across his face as he lay prone on the sandy ridge. His eyes scanned the horizon. The sky above was a pale orange, the planet's two suns casting long, unforgiving shadows over the barren landscape. He'd been on the planet for weeks now, sent by the Galactic Coalition to gather intelligence on the Avalak Empire's activities. Word had spread about an ancient energy source, the core, hidden somewhere on Kalanor, and Jacob's mission was simple: find it before the Avalaks did. His heart ached at the thought of why he was really here. The mission had a personal stake. Avalak ships had razed his home colony months ago, killing countless civilians, including people Jacob had grown up with. Ever since then, every mission was driven by more than orders. It was fueled by vengeance. As he surveyed the terrain, Jacob noticed movement far in the distance. His breath caught in his throat. A group of Avalak soldiers, easily identifiable by their dark armor and ominous triangular helmets, were surrounding someone. A lone figure was trying to escape, but it was clear they wouldn't last long. Through the scope, Jacob saw the figure stumble, a young woman with faintly glowing blue skin. Seraphian? He muttered to himself. The Seraphians were peaceful beings, their world destroyed by the Avalaks years ago. Most believed the race to be extinct, wiped out in the Empire's relentless pursuit of power. Seeing one alive, here on Kalanor, was nothing short of extraordinary. But why were they after her? The girl tripped, and the Avalak soldiers closed in. Jacob's finger hovered over the trigger. He knew it wasn't part of his mission to intervene. It was reckless, unnecessary. His orders were to remain hidden and avoid confrontation. But something about the desperation in the girl's movements struck him. He couldn't just stand by. With a quick decision, Jacob squeezed the trigger. A bolt of energy shot from his rifle, hitting one of the Avalak soldiers square in the chest. The other soldiers spun in confusion, and before they could react, Jacob fired again, taking down two more. The remaining soldiers scrambled to cover, trying to locate where the shots were coming from. Jacob used their panic to his advantage, charging down the ridge. With a few more precise shots, he finished the remaining enemies. The girl stood frozen, staring at the carnage. Jacob approached cautiously, lowering his weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The girl looked at him, her wide, violet eyes full of surprise and wariness. She shook her head. "No, I'm fine. You saved me." Jacob nodded. "Why were they after you?" Her lips trembled as she spoke. "Because I know where the core is." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. The core, the very thing the Coalition had sent him to find, was the key to stopping the Avalak Empire. If this girl knew its location, then she was the most valuable person in the galaxy right now. "We need to move," Jacob said, looking over his shoulder. "They'll send more troops soon." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm Aria," she said quietly, her voice laced with exhaustion. "I can help you find it, but it won't be easy." Jacob glanced at her again, taking in the weight of her words. What had started as a standard recon mission had suddenly become something much bigger and much more dangerous. But with Arya by his side, he now had a chance to take down the Empire once and for all. "Let's go," Jacob said. "Together, we'll make sure the core doesn't fall into the wrong hands." As they began to trek across the harsh desert, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far greater than himself. Jacob and Arya moved swiftly through the rocky canyons of Kalanor, the dry winds biting at their faces as they made their way toward the hidden location of the core. Arya led the way, her steps light and purposeful, though the weariness in her violet eyes betrayed how much she had endured. The faint glow of her blue skin seemed to pulse gently in rhythm with her breath, a reminder of her alien origin and her connection to something much larger than either of them. Jacob couldn't help but glance at her as they trekked. The Seraphians were said to be a peaceful and wise race, known for their deep spiritual connection to the energy that flowed through the universe. But their wisdom hadn't saved them from the Avalak Empire. Their homeworld had been annihilated, leaving only remnants like Arya scattered across the galaxy. Her presence was a living reminder of how merciless the Avalaks could be. "How far is the core?" Jacob asked, breaking the silence. "Not far," Arya replied. It's buried in the caverns of Licta, but we're not the only ones who know about it. The Avalax are already on the move. They've been searching for it for years. Jacob tightened his grip on his rifle. He knew the situation was critical. The core was rumored to be an ancient energy source of unimaginable power, something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. If the Avalax seized it, they could become unstoppable. You've been running from them for a while, haven't you? Jacob asked. His voice softening. Arya nodded, her gaze distant. Ever since I learned the truth about the core, my people had hidden it from the universe for eons. But now, with the Empire closing in, I had no choice but to flee. The Avalax destroyed my world. I couldn't let them have the power to destroy even more. Jacob felt a pang of empathy for her. Though he'd lost people to the Avalax war machine, he hadn't lost an entire world. The weight Arya carried must have been immense. As they neared the entrance to the caverns, Jacob's comlink buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He tapped it, his commander's voice crackling through. Jacob, what's your status? We've detected Avalax forces heading toward your location. Jacob's pulse quickened. We're close to the core, but so are they. Understood. Reinforcements are on the way, but they'll take time. Hold them off until then. The comlink went silent, leaving Jacob to process the gravity of the situation. Reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time. They were on their own, and they had to act fast. We don't have much time, Jacob said, turning to Arya. If the Avalax get here before we do, we'll lose everything. Arya glanced at him, her expression firm. Then we make sure they don't. Together, they descended into the caverns. The air grew cooler, the natural rock formations forming a maze-like labyrinth. The deeper they went, the more the tension between them grew. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the corridors, a reminder that they were being hunted. Suddenly, they reached a large chamber, and in its center, surrounded by jagged rocks and glowing crystals, lay the core. It was a large, pulsating sphere of pure energy, its surface shimmering with a soft blue light. The power radiating from it was palpable, filling the chamber with an eerie, otherworldly hum. We found it, Arya whispered, her eyes wide with awe. But before Jacob could respond, the unmistakable sound of Avalax blasters charging echoed through the cavern. The Empire's soldiers had caught up to them. Jacob spun around, rifle at the ready. Get to the core! I'll hold them off. Arya hesitated for only a moment before rushing toward the core, her hands already glowing as she prepared to connect with it. The Seraphians had a unique bond with the core's energy, and she would be their only chance of controlling it. A squad of Avalax soldiers stormed into the chamber, their dark armor gleaming ominously in the dim light. Jacob didn't waste time. He opened fire, precise shots taking down 2 soldiers before they could even react, but more kept coming. Their numbers overwhelming. Blaster fire filled the chamber, the sounds of the fight reverberating off the stone walls. Jacob moved with precision, using the rocks for cover as he fired at the advancing soldiers. Sweat trickled down his face, his muscles tense with the effort of fighting off wave after wave of Avalax troops. Meanwhile, Arya stood before the core, her hands raised, her eyes glowing with an intense blue light. She was channeling the core's energy, but it was clear she was struggling. The power was immense, and controlling it required every ounce of her strength. Jacob, Arya called out, her voice strained. I can't hold it for long. We need to leave, Jacob cursed under his breath, taking down another soldier before sprinting toward her. The Avalax were closing in, and time was running out. Can you move it? Jacob asked, glancing between her and the core. Arya shook her head, sweat beading on her brow. Not without more time. I can stop them from using it, but we need to get out of here. Jacob's mind raced. If they couldn't move the core, they'd have to make sure the Avalax couldn't take it either. Just then, a loud explosion shook the cavern. More soldiers were pouring in. The explosion echoed through the chamber, shaking loose stones and filling the air with dust and debris. Jacob quickly pulled Arya behind a large rock for cover, his heart pounding in his chest. The Avalax forces were closing in fast, their dark armored forms a shadowy blur in the low light of the cavern. We're outnumbered, Arya whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fear. Her hands still faintly glowed. evidence of the immense energy she had just been channeling from the core. Jacob peeked out from behind the rock, quickly assessing their situation. A group of Avalak soldiers was advancing from the entrance, their blasters trained on the cavern, while others were flanking from the side. Their numbers were growing by the second. "Hold them off as long as you can," Arya urged. Her gaze locked onto the glowing core. "I'll try to disrupt the energy flow so they can't use it." Jacob nodded. His jaw clenched. He knew Arya was their only hope. Without her, they had no chance of stopping the Avalaks from seizing the core. He had to buy her time, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, Jacob shouldered his rifle and stepped out from behind the rock, opening fire on the nearest group of soldiers. His shots were precise, taking down 2 Avalaks before they could react. But the others quickly returned fire, forcing him to dive behind another boulder. Blaster fire filled the chamber, creating an eerie symphony of echoes. The smell of scorched rock and metal filled the air as bolts ricocheted off the walls. Jacob was a soldier, trained for combat, but the relentless waves of enemies were beginning to wear him down. As he reloaded his weapon, his comlink crackled to life again. "Jacob, we're picking up heavy movement near your location. Reinforcements are still en route, but we need an update. Under heavy fire." Jacob barked into the comm. "We've found the core, but the Avalaks are swarming us. We won't last much longer without backup." There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end responded. "Hold your position. Help is on the way." Easier said than done, Jacob thought bitterly. He couldn't rely on reinforcements. He had to assume they were on their own. Turning back to Arya, he called out, "How's it going over there?" "I'm close," she replied, her voice strained. Her hands were now fully illuminated, and the energy around the core was shifting, pulsing in erratic waves. It was clear she was doing something, but it was taking a toll on her. Jacob fired another round at the advancing soldiers, but they just kept coming, their formation tightening as they closed in on the core. A sense of dread filled him. There were too many of them. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the far side of the chamber, sending several Avalak soldiers flying. A second later, a group of heavily armored humanoid figures burst into the room. Reinforcements. But Jacob's relief was short-lived. These weren't human soldiers. They were Avalaks. A figure in ornate black armor stepped forward from the new group. Clearly the leader. His helmet was etched with strange, glowing runes, and his presence alone radiated authority. He raised a hand, signaling his troops to hold their fire. "Human!" the leader shouted, his voice deep and commanding, echoing through the chamber. "You cannot win this. Surrender the core, and your life will be spared." Jacob's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. His gaze flickered to Arya, who was still locked in concentration, her body trembling from the strain of controlling the core's energy. "We won't surrender," Jacob shouted back. "The core doesn't belong to you." The Avalak leader chuckled darkly. "Foolish human, you have no idea the power you are meddling with." With a sharp gesture, he signaled his troops to advance again. The battle resumed in an instant, blaster fire filling the air once more. Jacob ducked as a bolt narrowly missed his head. He returned fire, managing to hit one of the Avalaks, but it barely slowed them down. Arya suddenly let out a cry, her body shuddering as a wave of energy rippled from the core. Jacob turned toward her in alarm, but she remained standing, her hands still outstretched toward the pulsating sphere. The energy around the core was intensifying, and Jacob could feel it, an almost overwhelming pressure in the air. "I'm almost there," Arya gasped. "But the energy, it's too much." Before Jacob could respond, the Avalak leader spoke again, this time more ominously. "Enough of this. If you won't surrender, then you will die." He raised his arm, and a bolt of crimson energy shot from his hand, straight toward Arya. "No," Jacob shouted, throwing himself in front of her. The energy blast hit him square in the chest, knocking him backward. Pain seared through his body, but he forced himself to stay conscious, refusing to give in. "Jacob!" Arya cried, her voice filled with fear. He struggled to his feet, clutching his chest. "I'm fine," he grunted, though the pain told him otherwise. "Just finish it." Arya's eyes burned with determination. She turned back to the core, her hands glowing brighter than ever. With a final, desperate surge of energy, she connected fully with the core. The entire chamber shook as the core unleashed a wave of pure, brilliant energy. The Avalak soldiers were thrown off their feet, their weapons shorting out as the energy overloaded them. Even the Avalak leader staggered, caught off guard by the sudden power surge. Arya collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, but the core now pulsed with a steady, controlled glow. She had done it. The Avalaks were retreating, their forces in disarray, but Jacob knew they'd be back. For now, though, they had won. Arya turned to him, her eyes soft with concern. "You're hurt." "I'll be fine," Jacob said, his voice hoarse. He took a step toward her, his heart pounding for a different reason now. In the heat of battle, he hadn't allowed himself to think about it, but now, standing here with Arya, he felt something he hadn't expected. Without thinking, he reached out and pulled her close. Their eyes met for a brief moment, filled with unspoken words. Then, slowly, Jacob leaned in and kissed her. For a moment, the universe faded away, leaving only the two of them standing in the glow of the core. When they finally pulled apart, Arya smiled softly. "We still have a war to win," she whispered. Jacob smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Yeah, but we've got time." Together, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The battle had subsided, but the air was still charged with tension. Jacob and Arya stood together, the pulsating core casting a soft, blue light around them. Though they had pushed back the Avalak forces for now, Jacob knew the fight was far from over. The Avalaks wouldn't give up easily, and they needed a plan to protect the core and defeat the looming threat. "Let's regroup with the others," Jacob suggested, glancing at the scattered debris and the remnants of the Avalak assault. "They'll need to know what happened here." Arya nodded, her expression serious. "And we need to strengthen our defenses around the core. It's too powerful to fall into their hands." They moved cautiously through the cavern, stepping over fallen stones and debris, until they reached a narrow tunnel that led to the surface. Jacob could hear the distant sounds of combat echoing through the stone walls, a reminder that the war was still raging outside. As they emerged from the tunnel into the bright sunlight, the scene before them was chaotic. The human resistance was engaged in fierce combat with Avalak soldiers, the air thick with the sounds of blaster fire and explosions. But there was a sense of determination in the faces of Jacob's fellow soldiers as they fought valiantly against their enemies. "Jacob!" "Arya!" a voice called out. It was Captain Marcus, the leader of their battalion, running toward them with urgency. "We thought you were lost. What happened in there?" Jacob quickly recounted their encounter with the core and the Avalaks. Emphasizing Arya's critical role in wielding its power, Captain Marcus listened intently, his expression shifting from relief to concern. "We need to rally the troops," Marcus said, his voice steady. "If the Avalaks realize we have the core, they'll come at us with everything they have. We can't let that happen." "I agree," Jacob said. "We have to secure the area and establish a defensive perimeter. If we can hold this ground, we can use the core's energy to our advantage." Arya stepped forward, her eyes bright with determination. "I can channel the core's energy to create a shield. It won't be easy, but it could protect us while we prepare for their next attack." "Then let's make it happen," Marcus said, rallying the nearby troops. "We'll need everyone on the front line. Let's show those Avalaks that they've picked the wrong fight." As the soldiers moved to their positions, Jacob and Arya hurried back to the cavern, where the core still pulsed with energy. Jacob could feel the power radiating from it, a vibrant force that made his skin tingle. It was the key to their survival. But it was also a beacon. Drawing the Avalaks closer, with a determined look, Arya closed her eyes and placed her hands over the core. A wave of energy rippled from her, enveloping them both in a protective barrier. Jacob watched in awe as the shield flickered into existence, shimmering like a mirage in the sunlight. "It's working," he said, a sense of hope swelling in his chest. "Now we need to prepare for their attack." The sounds of battle grew louder as they reinforced their positions. Soldiers took cover behind rocks, setting up makeshift barricades while others prepared their weapons. The tension in the air was palpable as they awaited the Avalak onslaught. Suddenly, A loud roar echoed through the canyon, shaking the ground beneath them. The Avalak forces had arrived, and they were determined to take the core. "Hold the line!" Captain Marcus shouted, raising his weapon as the first wave of Avalak soldiers charged into view. Jacob tightened his grip on his rifle, adrenaline coursing through him. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The Avalaks charged with relentless fury, blasters firing in a chaotic storm of energy. Jacob took aim, firing at the nearest enemy, his shots finding their mark as he worked in tandem with his fellow soldiers. They were outnumbered, but their resolve was unshakable. The shield created by Arya flickered and sparkled as energy bolts struck it, but she remained focused, channeling her strength into maintaining the barrier. Jacob could see the strain on her face, and he knew she was pushing herself to her limits. "Keep it steady," he shouted to her over the din of battle. "We're holding them off." Arya nodded, sweat glistening on her forehead. "I can't hold this for long. We need to push back." With a fierce determination, Jacob rallied his troops. "We need to go on the offensive. Arya, can you channel some energy to us?" "I'll try," she gasped, drawing upon the core's power. A surge of blue energy erupted from the shield, empowering the soldiers around Jacob. "Now! Charge!" Jacob shouted, leading the charge forward. The human soldiers surged, emboldened by Arya's energy. They pushed back against the Avalak forces, reclaiming ground with every step. Jacob fought fiercely, his instincts honed from years of training. He could see the Avalak leader among the fray, barking orders and directing his troops. If they could take him down, it might turn the tide of the battle. With renewed focus, Jacob locked onto the leader, weaving through the chaos. He fired shot after shot, but the leader was quick, dodging and returning fire. The two warriors engaged in a deadly dance, their movements swift and calculated, just as Jacob thought he had the upper hand. A blast from behind him knocked him off balance. He stumbled, regaining his footing just in time to see the Avalak leader charge toward Arya, who was still maintaining the shield. "No!" Jacob yelled, rushing to intervene. With every ounce of strength, he propelled himself forward, determined to protect her. As the Avalak leader raised his weapon, Jacob tackled him to the ground. They wrestled in the dirt, each trying to gain the upper hand. Jacob could hear the sounds of battle around him fading, his focus narrowing to the singular moment. "Foolish human," the leader spat, trying to push Jacob off. "You can't win." Jacob gritted his teeth, fueled by determination. "Maybe not, but I can fight for what's right." With a final surge of strength, Jacob managed to throw the leader off him and aimed his weapon at point-blank range. The blast rang out, echoing through the chaos as the leader crumpled to the ground. The tide of battle shifted. With their leader down, the Avalak forces hesitated, confusion spreading through their ranks. Jacob turned back to Arya, who was still channeling energy into the shield. "Now's our chance. Let's finish this," he called. Together, they launched a counterattack, emboldened by their victory over the Avalak leader. With renewed strength and determination, the human forces pushed back against the remaining Avalaks, driving them from the battlefield. As the dust settled, the soldiers cheered, but Jacob's focus remained on Arya. He rushed to her side, kneeling down as the shield flickered and faded. "You did it," he said, awe evident in his voice. Arya smiled weakly, her energy spent but her spirit unbroken. "We did it together." As the realization of their victory sank in, Jacob leaned in, capturing her lips with his in a gentle, meaningful kiss. It was a promise, a vow that they would stand together against whatever challenges lay ahead. Pulling away, Jacob looked into her eyes. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for each other." Arya nodded, a spark of determination igniting in her gaze. "And for a future we can build together." As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the battlefield, Jacob and Arya stood side by side, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. Together, they were more than just soldiers. They were a team, united by love and a shared purpose. And as they turned to join their comrades in celebration, they knew their fight was far from over, but they also knew they would face it together.